Jack Reacher had a simple rule for travel. Keep moving forward. Backtracking was inefficient, a waste of time and energy. But the bus he was on had a cracked engine manifold, and Havenwood, Montana, was the unscheduled stop where inefficiency had stranded him. The town sat nestled in a valley, looking like a postcard from a time before interstates and internet. Quaint, quiet, and according to the driver, at least a 12-hour wait for a replacement part from Billings. Reacher didn't mind. A day was just a day. He stepped off the bus into the crisp mountain air, a toothbrush in his pocket and nothing else. He found the town's only diner, a place with a buzzing neon sign that simply said, "Eat." Inside, the smell of stale coffee and bacon hung heavy. He took a booth by the window, ordered black coffee and pancakes, and settled in to watch the town wake up. Observation was a habit, ingrained from years in the military police. It was a muscle, and it was always flexed. Most of the patrons were locals, their conversations a low hum of gossip about cattle prices and the upcoming county fair. But two men in a booth across the room didn't fit. They were too clean, their haircuts too sharp, their clothes too new for a dusty Montana town. They weren't talking to each other. They were watching a third man, a rancher by the look of his worn jeans and calloused hands, who was nervously stirring his coffee at the counter. The rancher, a man named Miller according to the waitress, paid his bill and stood to leave. As he passed the booth with the two clean-cut men, one of them spoke, his voice too low for Reacher to hear the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was a command, not a conversation. Miller flinched, a barely perceptible tightening of his shoulders. He gave a short, jerky nod and walked out. Before the door swung shut, Reacher saw him get into an old Ford pickup, but he didn't drive away. He just sat there, staring at his steering wheel. The two men in the booth finished their coffee, paid in cash, and left. They got into a black, late-model SUV with tinted windows and followed Miller's truck as it finally pulled away from the curb. It was nothing. A local dispute, maybe. A debt being collected. None of Reacher's business. He finished his pancakes, which were excellent, and paid his bill. He stepped back out onto the main street. The sun was higher now, burning off the morning chill. He decided to walk the town's perimeter. It wouldn't take long. As he rounded a corner near the small municipal building, he saw the black SUV again. It was parked across the street from a small law office. One of the clean-cut men was leaning against it, arms crossed, watching the office door. Reacher kept walking, his pace even, his gaze neutral. He wasn't looking for trouble, but trouble, he'd found, often had a way of looking for him. He passed a small hardware store and glanced in the window. The reflection showed the second man from the diner emerging from the alley beside the law office. He made a subtle hand signal to the man at the SUV. A downward chop. A gesture Reacher knew well. Target acquired. Stand by. Reacher slowed his pace, feigning interest in a display of fishing lures. Who was the target? The lawyer. He saw a woman exit the law office. She looked worried, clutching a briefcase to her chest. She hurried to her car, fumbling with her keys. The men didn't move. They weren't watching her. Then, a man came out. Older, wearing a tired suit. He looked like a small-town lawyer. He scanned the street, his eyes lingering for a second too long on the SUV. He started walking in Reacher's direction. The two men pushed off the vehicle and started to follow him, their strides purposeful. They were flanking him, preparing to box him in. Reacher made a decision. He wasn't a cop anymore. He wasn't anybody's savior, but he hated bullies. He hated the quiet menace the two men radiated. He changed his own direction, angling to intercept the lawyer's path. "Excuse me," Reacher said, his voice calm and deep. The lawyer stopped, startled. "I'm new in town. Can you tell me where I might find the public library?" The lawyer blinked, confused. The library? It's 2 blocks that way." He pointed with a trembling finger. "Thanks," Reacher said. He didn't move. He stood, a solid 6'5" wall of muscle, directly between the lawyer and his pursuers. The two men stopped about 10 feet away. Their professional calm had evaporated, replaced by cold annoyance. You have a problem? The first man asked. His eyes were flat like polished stones. Just asking for directions, Reacher replied evenly. You got them. Now move along. Reacher looked at the lawyer. The man's face was pale with sweat. You okay? Reacher asked him. Before the lawyer could answer, the second man stepped forward. This is a private conversation. It looks like a public street to me, Reacher said. And it looks like you're making this man uncomfortable. The first man's hand twitched, a subtle move toward the jacket of his suit. Reacher saw it. He saw the slight bulge under the man's left arm. He saw the way his weight was balanced on the balls of his feet, ready to spring. He saw the second man starting to circle around to his right, a classic pincer move. They were professionals. Last chance, pal, the first man said. Walk away. Reacher didn't walk away. He took one step forward, closing the distance. He looked from one man to the other, then back again. He let the silence stretch. He let them feel his size, his stillness. He knew what they saw. Not a victim, but a problem they hadn't anticipated. A siren wailed in the distance, growing closer. A local patrol car. The two men exchanged a look. The first man gave a slight shake of his head. Not here. Not now. You just made a mistake, he said to Reacher, his voice a low promise. Then they turned, got back into their SUV, and drove away. The lawyer let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for minutes. Thank you, he gasped. My God, thank you. They were from the Vance Corporation. What's the Vance Corporation? Reacher asked. They run this town, the lawyer said, his voice trembling. They own the quarry, the lumber mill, everything, and everyone. He looked nervously down the street where the SUV had disappeared. You shouldn't have done that. They don't forget. I'm just passing through, Reacher said. You should pass through faster, the lawyer advised, before scurrying away. Reacher stood alone on the sidewalk. The siren had faded. The street was quiet again, but the postcard-perfect image of Havenwood had been torn. Underneath, something ugly was showing through, and he still had at least 11 hours to kill. He decided he would, in fact, go to the library. The trouble found him again an hour later. He was walking back towards the diner when a Havenwood Sheriff's Department car pulled up alongside him. The man who got out was big, with a gut that strained the buttons of his uniform and a face that looked permanently flushed with anger. A heavy brass nameplate read, Sheriff Brody. You, Brody grunted. We need to have a talk. Reacher stopped. About what? About assaulting two fine, upstanding members of our community. Nobody was assaulted, Reacher said. Mr. Harris and Mr. Thorne say different. They say you threatened them. In my town, we don't take kindly to drifters causing trouble. Brody's hand rested on the butt of his holstered pistol. Reacher knew the routine. This was the official warning, the one designed to intimidate him into getting on the next bus, no matter if the engine was fixed or not. Brody was part of the system. He was owned by the Vance Corporation. I was asking for directions, Reacher said. Get in the car, Brody ordered. Reacher didn't move. Am I under arrest? You will be if you don't get in the damn car. Reacher considered his options. He could fight. He could take Brody down in about 3 seconds. But that would create a bigger problem. It would give them a legitimate reason to hold him. A quiet approach was better, for now. He slowly walked to the passenger side and got in. The car smelled of cheap air freshener and suspicion. Brody drove them to the station, a small brick building that looked as old as the town. Inside, he was led not to an interrogation room, but directly to a holding cell. The steel door slammed shut with a clang of finality. Just until the next bus comes through, Brody said through the bars. For your own safety, of course. Reacher didn't bother to reply. He surveyed his new accommodations. A steel slab for a bed, a toilet, a sink. He sat on the edge of the slab. They had made a mistake. They thought locking him up would neutralize him. But all they had done was give him what he valued most. Time to think, with no distractions. He thought about the two men, Harris and Thorne, professionals. The way they moved, the way they communicated without words. Military or ex-military. Private security. He thought about the lawyer, terrified of something called the Vance Corporation. He thought about Sheriff Brody, a man who was clearly a puppet, a whole town held in a grip of fear. Why? What was in Havenwood worth controlling so completely? A few hours passed. The quiet of the station was broken only by the occasional crackle of the radio. Then he heard footsteps. A younger officer, a woman, appeared at his cell door. Her name tag read, Deputy Jenkins. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with a serious expression that didn't quite hide the uncertainty in her eyes. "Sheriff Brody said to give you this," she said, sliding a tray with a dry sandwich and a cup of water through the slot. "Thanks," Reacher said. She hesitated, not leaving immediately. "What did you do?" she asked, her voice quiet. "I asked a man for directions to the library." She gave a small, skeptical frown. "Harris and Thorne said you threatened to kill them." "Do I look like I need to make threats?" Reacher asked, his voice flat. Deputy Jenkins looked at him, really looked at him. She took in his size, the stillness of his posture, the intelligence in his eyes. She saw the old faded scars on his knuckles. She saw a man who was perfectly capable of violence but who didn't seem like the type to start it over nothing. "No," she admitted. "You don't." She paused. "Everyone in this town is afraid of the Vance Corporation. You're the first person I've seen stand up to them." "Fear is a choice," Reacher said. "Is it?" she countered. "When they control your job, your mortgage, the safety of your family, maybe it's just a survival instinct." She looked over her shoulder, down the empty hallway. "The lawyer you spoke to? His name is Peter Finley. He filed a wrongful death suit against Vance's quarry operation yesterday. A man was killed in a blasting accident last month. His widow thinks it was murder." Suddenly the pieces clicked into place. Harris and Thorne weren't just intimidating Finley, they were trying to stop him. "The next bus is at 9 p.m., Jenkins said, her tone becoming official again. "Brody will make sure you're on it. Just stay out of it. This isn't your fight." She turned and walked away, leaving Reacher alone with the dry sandwich and a much clearer picture of Havenwood's ugly secret. This wasn't his fight, but Jenkins was wrong. When bullies cornered a decent man in the street, it was always his fight. Reacher didn't touch the sandwich. He waited. He knew Brody wouldn't just let him go. The sheriff would escort him to the bus station personally to make sure he was gone. That was the moment he'd have to make his move. At 8:45 p.m., Brody appeared, jangling a set of keys. "Time to go, Drifter." Reacher stood up. Brody opened the cell door, standing back, his hand once again resting near his gun. He was cautious. Good. Caution could be used against a man. They walked out of the station into the cool night air. The street was quiet. Brody's patrol car was parked at the curb. "Get in," Brody said, gesturing to the passenger side. Reacher started to walk around the front of the car. As he passed the front bumper, out of Brody's direct line of sight for a fraction of a second, he moved. He didn't run. He just changed direction, melting into the deep shadows of the alley between the station and the building next door. "Hey!" Brody yelled, caught by surprise. He drew his weapon, fumbling with the snap on his holster. "Stop! Police!" Reacher was already gone. He moved through the alley, silent and fast. He vaulted a wooden fence at the back, landing softly in the unkempt yard of a closed-down bakery. He could hear Brody shouting into his radio, his voice tight with panic and rage. "Subject is on foot, heading east from the station. He's big, 6'5". Be advised, he is dangerous." Dangerous. That was a word they would come to understand. Reacher didn't head east. He circled back west, using backyards and darkened lanes, moving parallel to the main street. He needed information. He needed leverage. He needed to find the lawyer, Peter Finley. If Vance wanted him silenced, then Finley was the key to unlocking everything. He found Finley's office. It was dark. He checked the lawyer's home address in a phone book he'd spotted earlier, taped to the wall of a public phone booth. Finley lived in a small house on the edge of town. It was a risk going there. It was the first place Brody's men and Vance's thugs would look. But Reacher was counting on them, thinking he'd run, that he'd try to get out of the valley. They would be checking the roads, not the residential streets. He approached the house from the rear, moving through the thick pines that bordered the property. The lights were on inside. He saw movement through a window. He circled to the front, staying in the shadows. A car was parked in the driveway, Finley's car. But across the street, tucked under the deep shadow of an oak tree, was another vehicle, a black SUV. The same one from earlier. They weren't just watching the house. They were waiting. Reacher slipped back into the woods. He found a vantage point where he could see the front door and the SUV. He settled down to wait. Patience was a weapon, and Reacher had a formidable arsenal. An hour later, the front door of Finley's house opened. Finley stepped out, carrying a briefcase. He looked terrified. He started walking toward his car. The doors of the SUV opened and Harris and Thorne got out. They moved to intercept him, just as they had done that morning. But this time, Reacher was ready. He burst from the tree line, a silent, charging shadow. Thorne heard him first, a flicker of sound, the snap of a twig. He turned, his eyes widening in surprise. He didn't have time to react. Reacher's first punch was a right cross that landed with the force of a sledgehammer, snapping Thorne's head back and dropping him to the pavement like a sack of cement. Harris was faster. He had his gun out of its holster, turning as Reacher crashed into him. The gun went off, the shot deafening in the night, the bullet tearing harmlessly into the dirt. Reacher's left hand clamped down on Harris's wrist, squeezing the nerves until the man's fingers went numb and the gun clattered to the ground. Reacher's right elbow drove upward, a brutal short arc strike that connected with Harris's jaw. There was a sickening crunch of bone, and Harris collapsed, unconscious before he hit the ground. It had taken less than 5 seconds. Finley stared, his mouth open, the briefcase dropped at his feet. "Get in your car," Reacher said, his voice a low growl, "and drive." "But who?" "Now," Reacher commanded. Finley scrambled for his case, got in his car, and sped away. Reacher didn't watch him go. He bent down, picked up Harris's gun, and checked the magazine. Full. He tucked it into the back of his waistband. Then he dragged the 2 unconscious men, one by one, deep into the woods, propping them against a tree. They wouldn't be found until morning. He had escalated things. He knew that. From a person of interest, he had become the primary threat. The entire town would now be hunting him. He needed a place to think, a place to regroup. He thought of the one person in Havenwood who seemed to have a conscience, however hesitant. Deputy Jenkins. He didn't know if he could trust her, but right now she was the only option he had. He found her address in the same phone book. She lived in a small apartment complex on the other side of town. Getting there was a slow, careful process. He stuck to the shadows, listening for the sound of patrol cars, which were now crisscrossing the town with increasing frequency. He found her apartment, number 2B. He didn't knock. He listened at the door. He could hear the faint sound of a television. He circled around the back. A small balcony was attached to her living room, 1 floor up. An easy climb. He scaled the brickwork, moving with a practiced silence, and slipped over the railing onto her balcony. The sliding glass door was unlocked. A mistake, but one that worked in his favor. He slid it open just enough to slip through and entered her living room. She was on the sofa, watching the news, a cup of tea in her hands. She didn't see him at first. "You should lock your doors, Deputy," Reacher said quietly. She screamed, jumping to her feet and spilling her tea. Her hand went to her hip, to the empty space where her service weapon would normally be. It was on the coffee table. "Don't," Reacher said, holding up his hands. "I'm not here to hurt you." "What are you doing in my home?" she demanded, her voice shaking but angry. "There's an APB out for you. You assaulted 2 men and escaped custody." "The 2 men were about to abduct or kill Peter Finley," Reacher stated. "And I didn't escape custody. I left an illegal detention." He took a step closer, You know I'm right. You know something is rotten in this town. You told me yourself. Sarah Jenkins stared at him. Her training told her to call for backup, to arrest him on the spot. But her gut told her something else. It told her that this strange, dangerous man was telling the truth. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I want to know what the Vance Corporation is hiding, and I need your help to find out." She hesitated for a long moment. Helping him would mean betraying her badge, her sheriff, everything she was supposed to stand for. But standing by and doing nothing felt like a bigger betrayal. "They killed that man at the quarry, didn't they?" she said, more a statement than a question. "That's what Finley is looking into." "It's more than that," Reacher said. "A wrongful death suit is a civil matter. The response, the professional muscle, the sheriff on the payroll, it's too extreme. This isn't a cover-up, it's a protection detail. They aren't hiding something that happened, they're protecting an ongoing operation." He explained his theory. The town's isolation, the total control, the military precision of Vance's men. It all pointed to something big, something illegal and profitable. "I don't know what it is," she admitted. "Vance's main office is at the quarry. Security is insane. Ex-Special Forces, a man named Elias Vance runs it. He's a former Army colonel. He treats this valley like his own private kingdom." "Then that's where we need to look," Reacher said. "We?" she asked, incredulous. "You mean you? I can't. I'm a cop." "You're a cop in a town run by criminals," Reacher countered. "Your boss is one of them. Your badge means nothing here unless you use it to do the right thing. And right now, the right thing is helping me." He could see the conflict in her eyes, the fear warring with her sense of duty. "If I help you," she said slowly, "and we get caught, my life is over. If we don't get caught, Vance and Brody will know I helped you. My life will still be over." "Or," Reacher said, "we expose whatever they're doing, and you're the hero who cleaned up her town. Your life will just be starting." She took a deep breath. "Okay," she said, her voice firm. "Okay, what's the plan?" The plan was simple, and it was dangerous. Jenkins would use her credentials to get them past the main gate at the quarry under the pretext of a late-night security check, a routine she sometimes pulled. Once inside, Reacher would be on his own. His objective: find Vance's office and find out what they were protecting. They drove in her patrol car. It was a risk, but it was also their best cover. As they approached the quarry, the landscape changed. The friendly pines gave way to stark, open ground, illuminated by harsh floodlights. A 10-foot-high chain-link fence topped with razor wire surrounded the entire facility. The gate was manned by 2 guards who carried assault rifles as if they were born with them. Jenkins slowed the car, her face a mask of professional calm. Reacher was slouched low in the passenger seat, his face hidden in shadow. One of the guards approached her window. "Everything all right, Deputy?" "Just doing a perimeter check, Tom," she said, her voice steady. "Had a report of a prowler on the loose. Big guy. Brody's got everyone on edge." The guard grunted. "Yeah, we heard. Don't worry. Nothing gets in or out of here without us knowing." "Mind if I just take a quick loop around the main building? Just to be thorough?" she asked. The guard hesitated, then nodded. "Go ahead. But be quick. Mr. Vance doesn't like visitors after dark." He waved her through. The gate slid open. Jenkins drove slowly toward the main administrative building, a large, windowless concrete structure. She parked in a designated spot at the far end of the lot, in the deepest shadow. "This is as far as I can take you," she whispered. "Vance's office is on the top floor. There are cameras everywhere." "Stay here," Reacher said. "If I'm not back in 20 minutes, leave. Get as far away from this town as you can." He slipped out of the car and was gone, a ghost moving between the parked machinery. He found a blind spot behind a massive earth mover, studying the building. There were no obvious ways in, but there were always ways. He spotted a series of ventilation ducts running up the side of the building. They were wide enough. He scaled the ductwork, his fingers and boots finding purchase on the metal seams. He reached the roof. A single access hatch was locked from the inside. He pulled Harris's pistol from his waistband. He didn't shoot the lock. Too loud. He used the heavy butt of the gun, striking the metal housing around the lock mechanism with precise, brutal force. Once. Twice. On the third strike, the metal bent and the latch popped free. He slipped inside, into a dark maintenance corridor. He could hear the low hum of electronics. He moved down a set of stairs, emerging into a pristine white hallway. The top floor. A single door at the end was marked E. Vance, Director. It was locked, of course. A high-tech electronic keypad. No way to bypass it silently. But next to it was a small grated air return vent. He pried the grate off. The opening was small, but he managed to squeeze his shoulders through, then his hips, dropping into the darkened office. The office was immaculate, militaristically tidy. A large desk, a computer, and a wall of filing cabinets. He went to the computer first. It was password protected. He turned his attention to the cabinets. They were locked. He used the barrel of the pistol as a lever, forcing the lock on the first one. It was filled with standard personnel files. The second one held financial records. In the third one, he found it. It wasn't a document. It was a logbook, a shipping ledger. It was filled with dates, times, and a series of 10-digit numeric codes. Reacher's eyes scanned the page. He froze. He recognized the format. It was an old military logistics code, a system used for tracking sensitive or hazardous materials. It had been phased out years ago, forgotten by most. But he had been an instructor on that system at West Point. He knew it by heart. He pulled out his phone, which Jenkins had given him, and took pictures of several pages. Each code started with a prefix that designated the class of material. He saw prefixes for high explosives, for chemical agents, and for something he hadn't seen in years, a prefix for dismantled nuclear components. His blood ran cold. This wasn't a weapons-running operation. It was something infinitely more dangerous. Vance was trafficking black-market nuclear material through this quiet Montana town. The man killed at the quarry hadn't died in an accident. He had probably stumbled onto the truth. And Finley's lawsuit wasn't just a nuisance. It threatened to bring in outside investigators who might uncover the entire operation. An alarm suddenly blared through the building, a piercing shriek. He must have tripped a silent sensor on the cabinet. Reacher didn't hesitate. He scrambled back through the air vent just as he heard heavy footsteps pounding down the hall. He got to the roof, slammed the hatch shut, and started down the ventilation ducts. Lights flashed on below. Guards were swarming out of the building, fanning out across the yard. The black SUV screeched to a halt below him. A man got out of the passenger side. He was older than the others, with a ramrod-straight posture and cold, commanding eyes. Elias Vance. Vance looked up, his gaze sweeping the area. His eyes locked onto the ventilation shaft. He saw Reacher. He raised a pistol and fired. The bullet sparked off the metal duct just inches from Reacher's head. Reacher dropped the last 15 feet, rolling as he hit the ground. He came up running, zigzagging between the heavy machinery. Bullets chewed up the dirt around him. He could see Jenkins's patrol car, its lights flashing on as she started the engine. She was waiting for him. A brave, foolish move. He sprinted the last 50 yards, bullets whipping past him, and wrenched the passenger door open, diving inside. "Go! Go now!" Jenkins floored it. The patrol car fishtailed on the gravel, then shot toward the gate. The guards up ahead were moving to close it, raising their rifles. "Don't stop!" Reacher yelled. She didn't. She hunched down over the steering wheel, her foot pressing the accelerator to the floor. The patrol car, reinforced with a steel push bar, smashed through the chain-link gate with a screech of tearing metal. They were out, but they weren't free. Behind them, 2 black SUVs and several other trucks roared to life, their headlights cutting through the darkness as they gave chase. "They'll have the roads blocked," Jenkins said, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Then we don't take the roads," Reacher replied. He looked at the rugged terrain map on the car's console. "There, that old logging trail. It leads up into the mountains." She swerved off the main road, the patrol car bouncing violently as it hit the unpaved trail. The chase was on. Branches scraped against the car, and the suspension groaned in protest. Behind them, the powerful SUVs were gaining. They were built for this kind of terrain. "They're faster," Jenkins said, her voice tight with fear. "But we're smarter," Reacher said. He looked at the forest around them. Thick stands of pine, piles of old cut logs left by the lumber company. An idea formed. "Keep driving. When I tell you, hit the brakes. Hard." He braced himself, the pistol he'd taken from Harris in his hand. They rounded a sharp bend. A pile of massive logs was stacked precariously on a small ridge just above the trail. "Now!" Reacher yelled. Jenkins slammed on the brakes. The car skidded to a halt. Reacher was already out the door. He fired 3 shots, not at the pursuing vehicles, but at the thin metal bands holding the log pile together. The first shot missed. The second snapped one of the bands. The third shattered the other. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a deep groan, the entire pile of multi-ton logs gave way, thundering down the ridge in a deadly avalanche of wood and dirt. The lead SUV had no time to stop. It tried to swerve but was crushed, flattened under the immense weight. The second SUV screeched to a halt just in time, its path completely blocked. Reacher jumped back in the car. "Drive!" They drove for another 2 miles, putting as much distance as they could between them and Vance's men. They finally emerged onto a small, paved county road. They were clear, for now. Jenkins pulled over, her whole body trembling. "My God," she whispered. "Nuclear material? Here?" "Vance is using the town as a transit hub. The perfect cover," Reacher said, showing her the photos on his phone. "We have to get this to the authorities. Real ones." "The nearest FBI field office is in Billings. That's a 3-hour drive," she said. "We'll never make it. They'll have every road out of this valley blocked." "We're not driving to Billings," Reacher said. "Vance thinks we're running. He's a military man. He'll expect us to follow predictable escape and evasion routes, so we're going to do the last thing he expects. We're going back." Jenkins looked at him as if he were insane. "Back? They'll kill us on sight." "Not if we don't let them see us," Reacher said. "He's pulled all his men out to hunt for us. That means his base of operations, the quarry, is vulnerable. And according to that ledger, he has another shipment scheduled to move. Tonight, at 0300 hours. Reacher glanced at the car's clock. It was 1:30 a.m. "We're not going to run. We're going to stop him. We're going to stop the shipment. And we're going to give the FBI a reason to come here themselves." The new plan was even more reckless than the first. They abandoned the patrol car, hiding it in a thicket of trees. They would go back on foot, back into the lion's den. They moved through the forest, the moon their only light. Reacher's internal clock was ticking. They had to get there before the shipment was loaded and gone. As they neared the quarry, they could see that he was right. The facility was lit up, but the manpower was focused outward on the roads. Security inside was thin. They slipped back through the hole they had made in the fence. The wreckage of the crushed SUV and the log pile was still blocking the logging trail. A few men were trying to clear it, their attention focused on their work. "The shipment will be loaded onto a truck," Reacher whispered. "We need to find it and disable it." They found it in a large loading bay at the rear of the main building. A lead-lined container was being loaded by a crane onto the back of a nondescript semi-truck. Vance himself was overseeing the operation, barking orders at a skeleton crew of 3 men. Reacher and Jenkins hid behind a stack of empty pallets. "I'm going to create a diversion," Reacher said. "When I do, you get to that truck, get in the cab, start it, and drive it straight into the main building. Jam it in the doorway. Block them in." "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm going to have a talk with Colonel Vance." Before she could object, he was gone. He circled around the loading bay, using the shadows and machinery for cover. He picked up a heavy steel pipe from a scrap pile. He saw Vance turn his back to issue an order to the crane operator. That was his moment. Reacher stepped out of the shadows. The 3 guards saw him first. Their eyes went wide. They reached for their weapons. They were too slow. Reacher threw the steel pipe like a spear. It spun end over end, crashing into the main electrical junction box on the wall. Sparks erupted, and the entire quarry was plunged into darkness as the floodlights and the crane motor died simultaneously. Men shouted in confusion. In that moment of chaos, Reacher moved. He closed the distance to the first guard, disarming him and dropping him with a single, precise strike to the throat. He took the man's rifle. The second guard fired blindly into the darkness. The muzzle flash gave away his position. Reacher returned fire, a short, controlled burst. The man fell. The third guard tackled Reacher from the side. They went down, wrestling for the rifle. Reacher was stronger. He slammed the man's head against the concrete floor. Once, twice. The man went limp. Across the loading bay, Jenkins followed her instructions. She sprinted for the truck, climbed into the cab, and fumbled for the keys, which were still in the ignition. The engine roared to life. Vance, realizing what was happening, turned and ran toward the truck, firing his pistol. "Stop!" Jenkins didn't stop. She put the truck in gear and slammed her foot on the accelerator. The semi lurched forward, straight toward the main administrative building. Vance had to dive out of the way to avoid being run over. The truck crashed halfway into the building, its front end demolishing the wall and its trailer completely blocking the only large exit from the loading bay. The emergency generators kicked in, and a dim, eerie light filled the area. Reacher stood over the third guard, the rifle in his hands. Across the bay, Elias Vance slowly got to his feet, dusting himself off. He was trapped. It was just the two of them. "You," Vance said, his voice a low, hateful snarl. "The drifter. You have no idea what you've just done. I've stopped a traitor from selling nuclear components to the highest bidder," Reacher said, his voice cold. "I'm a patriot," Vance roared. "This country is weak, decadent. It throws its warriors away. I'm taking what I am owed. I'm building a new world order." "You're a common thief," Reacher said, "and an unoriginal one at that." Vance raised his pistol. Reacher raised his rifle. They stood 30 yards apart, two ex-military men, products of the same system, now on opposite sides of a line drawn in the dirt of a Montana quarry. "There's no way out for you, Reacher," Vance said. "My men will be back any minute. They'll tear you apart." "Your men are scattered all over the county chasing a ghost," Reacher replied. "It's just you and me, Colonel." Vance fired. Reacher dived behind a concrete barrier as the bullet chipped the stone where his head had been. He came up, aimed, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against his shoulder. The bullet hit Vance in the thigh. The colonel cried out in pain and dropped to one knee, his pistol clattering away. Reacher walked slowly toward him, the rifle leveled at Vance's chest. He stood over the wounded man. "It's over," Reacher said. Vance looked up, his face contorted with pain and rage. "It's never over." He reached inside his jacket. Reacher didn't hesitate. He fired again. The shot was clean, precise. The war was finished. He found Jenkins hiding near the wrecked truck, shaken but unharmed. Sirens wailed in the far distance. She must have found a way to call for help. "The FBI?" Reacher asked. She nodded. "I used one of the guards' radios. Told them everything." They stood in silence for a moment, listening to the approaching sirens. The cavalry was coming. The real cavalry. "They'll want to talk to you," she said. "You'll be a witness. A hero." Reacher shook his head. "I'm a drifter, remember? I was never here." He looked toward the broken main gate, toward the road that led out of the valley. He had stayed too long already. His 12-hour delay had stretched into a lifetime for some. "Thank you, Jack," she said, her voice filled with an emotion he couldn't afford to acknowledge. He just gave her a short nod. He turned and walked away from the lights, away from the sirens, away from the mess. He melted back into the woods, a ghost returning to the shadows. By the time the first federal agents swarmed the quarry, Jack Reacher was already miles away, walking down a dark road, waiting for the sun to rise, waiting for the next bus to somewhere else. He had a rule: keep moving forward. and there was always a road ahead.